Chapter 1. The Silent Cry. The planet was a barren wasteland, its once thriving surface now a vast, desolate desert of jagged rocks and scattered debris. The landscape stretched endlessly into the horizon, an unforgiving, hostile expanse that seemed to mock the idea of life. No signs of civilization remained except for crumbled structures that stood as silent witnesses to a forgotten time, their walls cracked, their foundations shifting in the sands of decay. The air was thick with dust, carrying with it the faint stench of forgotten fires and burnt-out technologies. It was a place that time had forgotten, a world abandoned by all who once called it home, and now it lay in quiet ruin, slowly dying under the weight of its own tragic history. Somewhere deep within the heart of this forsaken land, hidden away in a hollowed-out building that had long since surrendered to the slow decay of its materials, a faint sound cut through the silence. A sound that was fragile, barely audible over the wind that howled through the shattered windows, rattling the broken frames. It was the sound of a baby's cry, weak and trembling, a sound that seemed out of place in this graveyard of a planet. The cry wasn't loud, but it was insistent, reaching out to a world that had long abandoned hope. Beneath the collapsed ceiling, beneath the twisted metal and shattered stone that once made up the walls of the building, a tiny alien baby lay, its small, fragile body curled into itself in a desperate, instinctive attempt to seek comfort from the cold void around it. The baby's skin, pale and delicate, shimmered faintly in the dim light that managed to sneak through the cracks in the debris. It was the color of moonlight, a pale blue that contrasted starkly against the gray dust that clung to the remnants of the room. Its large, round eyes stared up at the shattered ceiling, the pupils dilated with confusion and fear, yet devoid of understanding. The baby's breathing was shallow, its tiny chest rising and falling in small, almost imperceptible motions. It was a creature of such innocence, such fragility, and yet it had been abandoned here, alone and forsaken, in a world that had nothing left to offer. There was no one to help it, no one to offer comfort or warmth, no one to hold it in their arms and tell it that everything would be all right. The baby's cries grew weaker with each passing moment, a silent testament to the cruelty of the universe and the fleeting nature of life. It had been left behind. The alien race to which this child belonged had once flourished on this world. Their society advanced beyond anything the humans of Earth could comprehend. They had reached for the stars, building cities that touched the heavens, creating technologies that defied the very laws of nature. But it had all come crashing down. War had torn their world apart. Alien invaders, relentless and cruel, had ravaged the planet, burning cities and destroying everything in their path. The alien race, powerful and proud, had been reduced to a mere shadow of its former self. Entire generations had been wiped out, and in the end, the few survivors had scattered to the wind, hiding in the corners of a dying world. This baby, a survivor, had been abandoned, left to die alone in the ruins of a civilization that had once been great. The cries of the infant grew softer, fading as its tiny body grew weaker, the life force inside it flickering like a candle caught in a gust of wind. Its delicate fingers twitched, reaching for anything that might offer salvation, but there was nothing. The building was empty, the silence profound. Only the wind outside moved, sweeping dust and sand into the empty spaces, as if the planet itself had forgotten what it once was. The baby's breath became more labored, its tiny chest barely rising, as though the weight of the world had finally come crashing down on its fragile form. It was moments away from death, its heart beating with a feeble rhythm, barely hanging onto the thin thread of life. And yet, in that moment, as the last flicker of hope seemed to be snuffed out, something changed. Something stirred in the distance. There was a sound, the faintest vibration in the air, like the hum of an engine. A low rumble, growing louder by the second. The baby's breathing paused, and its eyes cloudy with the beginning signs of death shifted toward the sound. A soft, almost imperceptible noise that seemed to signal a distant hope, a life force approaching. The faintest rustle of wind brushed through the air, not the harsh, cold gusts of the dying planet, but something warmer, more alive. In the distance, beyond the ruined building, a small craft touched down, its landing gear scraping against the barren ground with a harsh screech. The ship was a simple one, no grand design or flashy markings. It looked like a salvage vessel, the kind that roamed the farthest reaches of space looking for abandoned ruins to explore, forgotten treasures to claim. The ship's hatch opened with a soft hiss, and from within emerged a lone figure, a human. His name was Elias, and he had come to this planet seeking a different kind of treasure. Not gold or alien artifacts, but something far more precious, a purpose. He was a scavenger, a loner by nature, but over the years, he had found his calling in the remains of dying worlds. It was on these forgotten planets, amongst the wreckage and ruins, that he had made his home, piecing together a life from the fragments of lost civilizations. Elias had been searching this particular planet for weeks. He had stumbled upon the coordinates during one of his many explorations, a signal that led him to believe someone was still alive here. His initial scan had yielded nothing, just more lifeless ruins, but there had been a nagging feeling in his gut, a sense that something important was waiting for him. Now, standing in the ruins, he felt it again, the sense that he was not alone. His boots crunched against the dry, cracked earth as he moved cautiously toward the building, his mind racing with possibilities. What had he found here? What had been left behind in the wake of a war that seemed to have wiped out everything? He pushed open the door of the structure, his hand gliding over the remnants of a once grand doorway now reduced to rubble. The faintest sound of a cry reached his ears, and his heart skipped a beat. The voice was small, desperate, filled with a need that cut through him like a knife. As he stepped into the ruins, his eyes scanned the interior. The dim light, filtered through the broken windows, cast long shadows across the floor. And there, amid the debris, he saw it, a tiny, alien form lying alone on the cold stone floor. The child's fragile body was barely moving, its cries almost silent, as though it had given up. Elias felt a pang of something he hadn't expected: sympathy, perhaps, or pity. He didn't know why, but something about this baby, so vulnerable and abandoned, reached into him. Without thinking, he rushed forward, kneeling beside the infant, his hands shaking as he gently lifted it into his arms. The baby's fragile body felt like it was barely there, its skin cold and clammy to the touch. He could feel the faint pulse beneath the surface, the heart still beating, though weakly, like a flicker of light in the darkness. "Hey, it's okay," Elias whispered, his voice soft, though he wasn't sure why he was speaking. The baby's eyes flickered weakly, its gaze meeting his for a moment before it closed again, its energy drained. But something in the way it clung to him, even in its weakened state, made Elias feel like he was meant to be here, at this moment. He had always been a loner, an outcast, wandering the void of space in search of things no one else cared about. But now, holding this tiny alien in his arms, he felt like something had changed. He wasn't just a scavenger. He wasn't just picking through the wreckage of others' lives anymore. For the first time in a long time, he had found something to care for, something to protect. The baby's weak cry faded into silence as Elias stood, cradling the alien child in his arms. He didn't know what to do next, but he knew one thing for sure. He wasn't going to let this creature die alone. He had come to this planet to find something lost, but in the end, he had found something far more valuable: a purpose. Elias stood still for a moment, holding the alien baby in his arms as if afraid that moving too quickly might shatter the fragile connection between them. The cold air of the ruined building pressed in, making the baby's fragile skin feel even colder, but Elias could feel the warmth of its tiny form against his chest. It was a strange sensation caring for something so small, so helpless, in the middle of a barren wasteland where survival itself seemed impossible. He didn't even know how he had ended up here, on this dead planet. His life had always been about drifting, moving from one place to the next with no real purpose, no clear goal other than survival. But now, with this baby in his arms, the weight of responsibility crashed down on him in a way he hadn't anticipated. The faint glow of the planet's dying sun filtered through the shattered windows, casting long, wavering shadows across the broken floor. Elias gently adjusted his grip on the baby, cradling it closer to his chest. Its breathing was shallow, the rise and fall of its chest barely perceptible. Elias had seen many things in his travels: wrecks, ruins, and the broken remnants of once great civilizations, but nothing had ever made him feel this sense of urgency. This child was the last of its kind, perhaps the only living being left on this entire planet, and it was in his care now. The first instinct was to get out of there, to find somewhere safer, somewhere with food, with warmth. He glanced back toward the ship he had landed in, the hum of its engine still reverberating in his bones. But the more he thought about it, the more he realized he couldn't just leave. Something deep inside him told him that he had been brought here for a reason. This was no accident. He wasn't just here to scavenge for lost technology or abandoned treasures. He was here to save this child. Elias looked down at the baby again, its alien features now more apparent as his eyes adjusted to the dim lighting. Its small, translucent wings fluttered weakly, but they were barely able to hold the tiny body aloft. Its skin was dotted with faint, luminescent patterns, giving it a mystical, almost ethereal quality that only made the child's fragility more heartbreaking. There was something about its delicate, alien beauty that struck Elias deep within. He had always been one to keep his distance from people, never forming attachments, never getting close to anyone for fear of loss, but here, now, he could not bring himself to walk away. He had no idea what this baby would grow to become or what its kind had once been, but Elias understood, perhaps for the first time, what it meant to protect something that was completely and utterly dependent on him. He had always been alone. He had roamed the stars without direction or meaning, a scavenger in a universe that seemed too vast to care about anything. But with this baby, Elias felt something stir inside him. It was an unfamiliar feeling, a sense of responsibility, of connection. Perhaps this was what he had been searching for all along, without even knowing it. Elias carefully moved through the ruins, stepping over broken pieces of ancient alien technology, the remains of once functional machines that had now been reduced to rubble. He moved with purpose now, his steps more determined than before, as if this child had given him a reason to act beyond his usual aimlessness. As he reached the door of the building, he paused and glanced over his shoulder, the silence pressing down on him like a heavy weight. There was no one else here. No other survivors. No one left to help. He had no choice but to help this child, and that was a responsibility he wasn't about to ignore. Outside, the wind howled fiercely, kicking up dust and dirt from the barren landscape. Elias squinted against the harsh gusts, the distant sound of his ship's engine still rumbling faintly behind him. He moved toward the craft, cradling the baby close to his chest to protect it from the biting cold. Once inside, the warmth of the ship's cabin greeted him, the hum of the life support systems filling the silence. It wasn't much, just a small, cramped space, but it would have to do. Elias placed the baby carefully on a cot near the ship's center console, his hands still shaking slightly as he adjusted its blanket. The infant stirred weakly but did not cry, its tiny eyes still flickering with faint signs of life. Elias quickly pulled up the medical scanner, praying for any sign of hope. The screen flickered, and he saw the scan results come through. It wasn't good. The baby was severely malnourished, dehydrated, its tiny body running a fever. Its species' physiology was entirely alien to him, and there was no telling what it needed to survive. But the reading confirmed what Elias had already known. The baby was moments from death if it didn't get help soon. He exhaled slowly, his mind racing. He had medical supplies, but they were standard issue, nothing prepared for something as specific and alien as this. He would have to rely on his instincts, his ability to improvise. Elias couldn't help but feel the gravity of the situation. This wasn't just a rescue operation, it was a fight for survival. This baby's survival. Elias glanced back at the cot, his heart aching with the responsibility that had so suddenly been thrust upon him. He had been given this chance, this purpose, but what did he truly know about the child he had saved? Its species, its history, its future, all of that was a mystery. But he had always been good at figuring things out, and he wasn't about to let this be the thing that slipped through his fingers. As he moved to prepare a small nutrient solution, he glanced again at the tiny alien. The baby's eyes flickered open for a brief moment, and it looked directly at him, its gaze filled with a mix of confusion and fragile trust. For a fleeting second, Elias wondered if it recognized him, if it saw in him the one thing it needed most right now, someone who cared. He wasn't just a scavenger anymore. He wasn't alone. Chapter 2. An Unexpected Bond. The next few days were a blur of care, and concern. Elias worked tirelessly to stabilize the alien baby, using every tool at his disposal to try and keep it alive. He had created a makeshift incubator in the ship's medical bay, setting up a system of heat lamps and nutrient tubes designed to slowly feed the baby as it recovered from its starvation and dehydration. The medical scanner helped, though it was far from perfect in its readings, constantly adjusting as Elias made his best guesses. The baby had begun to show signs of improvement, though it remained weak, its energy barely enough to keep its tiny body alive. Each day that passed felt like a victory, but Elias knew that he couldn't let up. He had to keep pushing, keep fighting for the baby's survival. He was its only chance now. The alien world outside offered no help, no resources. It was just him and the child. During this time, Elias began to study the baby more closely. Its physiology was so different from anything he had ever encountered, and yet it fascinated him. Its eyes, large and unblinking, held a depth to them, as if the child was trying to communicate, though its language was beyond him. The glowing patterns on its skin seemed to pulse faintly, a visual cue that Elias couldn't quite understand. He wondered if these were remnants of its once great civilization, a vestige of its people's lost culture. Days turned into weeks, and the bond between Elias and the alien baby grew. The infant, though still fragile, began to open its eyes more often, its tiny hands grasping weakly at the air. Elias, ever the solitary figure, found himself talking to it at night, as though the simple act of speaking could somehow reassure it, even though he knew it couldn't understand. "Don't worry," he would whisper as he adjusted the nutrient fluids. "I'll take care of you. I'll figure this out. You're not alone anymore." One evening, as Elias sat by the cot, watching the baby's delicate breathing slow and stabilize, he felt a shift in the air around him. It wasn't a sound or a sight, but a feeling. The baby's eyes flickered open, and for the first time, it seemed to focus on him with intent. Its large, alien eyes met his, and for a moment, Elias felt something stir within him, something deeper than the need to simply survive. There was trust in those eyes, a fragile, fleeting trust. And for the first time in his life, Elias felt that he wasn't just a loner in the void of space. He had a purpose. As the days turned into weeks, Elias found himself no longer viewing the alien baby as just another scavenger's discovery, a relic of a dying planet. The baby had become more than that. It was his responsibility, his charge, his reason for waking up each day, and he couldn't shake the overwhelming need to protect it. The child had no name, no history, no family left. It was, in many ways, as lost as Elias himself. Yet, in caring for it, he found something he hadn't realized he had been searching for, a connection, a sense of purpose that had eluded him for as long as he could remember. The baby's condition steadily improved. It started to respond to his voice, its eyes following him as he moved around the ship. It would grasp weakly at his fingers when he offered them, a silent plea for comfort. Elias marveled at how resilient the child was, despite the devastation it had endured. It was still fragile, its tiny body too weak to stand on its own, but every day it grew a little stronger. Elias had never been good with others. He had always preferred solitude, the quiet hum of his ship as his only companion, the stars as his only witnesses. But now, with the baby's tiny hand wrapped around his finger, Elias felt something he hadn't felt in years, a spark of hope, however fleeting. He had come to this planet with no real purpose other than to salvage what remained of the old world. Now, he had a reason to keep going. He had something to fight for. One evening, as Elias sat beside the makeshift incubator, watching the baby sleep, a faint, almost imperceptible noise caught his attention. His heart raced as he stood up quickly, instinctively reaching for his blaster. The ship was quiet, too quiet, but something had stirred outside the ship, a subtle vibration in the air that sent a cold shiver down his spine. He glanced at the baby, who remained peacefully asleep, unaware of the world beyond. Elias hesitated for a moment before moving toward the airlock. The moment his foot hit the floor outside the ship, he felt the weight of the desolate world press in on him once more. The air was thick with dust, and the wind howled across the cracked surface of the planet. He scanned the horizon, his eyes narrowing as he searched for any sign of movement, any indication that he wasn't alone. The landscape stretched out before him in an endless expanse of gray, broken by the jagged edges of long-abandoned ruins. His instincts told him he wasn't alone. He could feel it in the hairs on the back of his neck, the unease settling into his chest. Someone or something was out there, watching. Just as quickly as the feeling had come, a movement caught his eye. Shadows shifted in the distance, moving too fast to be natural. Elias' heart skipped a beat. He raised the blaster, his finger poised on the trigger, ready for whatever was coming. He had spent enough time in the void to know that danger could come from anywhere, even a barren wasteland like this. But as the shape in the distance grew closer, his grip on the blaster loosened. It was another human man, ragged and weathered, with tattered clothes and a wild, desperate look in his eyes. He was carrying something in his arms, his body hunched over as though to shield whatever it was from the world. His face was gaunt, his skin pale and drawn from weeks, maybe months of exposure. His movements were frantic, his breath ragged as he drew closer, almost as if the world around him were collapsing. Elias lowered his blaster, confusion clouding his mind. Who was this man? And what was he doing here? The stranger stumbled forward, barely able to maintain his balance. His eyes locked onto Elias for a moment before he spoke, his voice hoarse and weak, as though speaking had become a laborious task. "Please help. I beg you, help me." The stranger gasped, his arms cradling whatever it was he was holding. Elias' eyes shifted to the bundle the man was carrying. The moment he saw what it was, his blood ran cold. The baby. But this was no ordinary child. This was an alien baby like the one he had been protecting. Elias' breath caught in his throat as he took a step back. How could there be another? How? How did you dash? Elias started to ask, but the stranger collapsed in front of him before he could finish. The alien baby fell from the man's arms, and Elias caught it instinctively, holding it close to his chest. He glanced down at the baby, then back to the man, who was lying motionless on the ground. His clothes were torn, his face gaunt and sunken, his body a skeletal remnant of a man who had endured too much. But there was no time to ponder the questions swirling in his mind. Elias knew he couldn't just leave this man here, especially not with the baby in his arms. He dropped to his knees, checking the stranger for any signs of life, but found nothing. The man was gone, his body too weak, too ravaged by the hardships of a world that had no mercy. Without wasting another second, Elias scooped both babies into his arms, one cradled protectively against his chest, the other nestled in his arms. He moved swiftly, moving back into the ship. This was no coincidence. He had saved one child, and now there was another just as fragile, just as abandoned. The strange pull inside him grew stronger, more insistent. He wasn't just a scavenger anymore. Elias had been brought here for a reason, but he couldn't yet understand what that reason was. Chapter 3: The Stranger's Story. Back inside the ship, Elias set the two babies down in the small, sterile corner he had set up as their temporary nursery. He had no medical equipment left, no way of knowing what had caused the stranger's collapse, but Elias was certain the man had been here for a long time, far longer than he should have been. His body had been broken, but it had somehow managed to survive until now. Elias looked at the two babies side by side, one still weak but stable, the other frail and gasping for air, struggling to stay alive. Elias didn't know who these babies were or how they had come to be here, but there was no doubt in his mind that they had a connection somehow, someway. They were both the last of their kind, abandoned on a dying world, and somehow, fate had placed them in his care. He looked from one baby to the other, his thoughts whirling. How had the stranger found them? Was there a chance he wasn't the only one left? Elias pushed the thoughts away for the time being. The immediate concern was survival. These babies were both in grave danger, and Elias couldn't risk them dying on his watch. As the hours passed, Elias continued to care for the babies, giving them nutrient injections, soothing them when they cried, and monitoring their health as best as he could. His mind wandered back to the stranger. What had driven him to this planet, and why had he chosen to bring the baby here, only to die in front of Elias? The answers seemed to evade him, just as they always had in his life. But now, there was something else, something much larger than himself. He wasn't just a lone traveler anymore. He had a responsibility, and that responsibility was staring back at him through the fragile eyes of the two alien children he had sworn to protect. The journey ahead would be long, fraught with questions and uncertainty. But for the first time, Elias felt the stirrings of something he hadn't known. He was capable of hope. Chapter 4. A New Beginning. The next few days were filled with the relentless routine of survival. Elias tended to the babies, keeping a constant vigil over them, ensuring they received the nutrients they needed to regain their strength. The ship was small, but it was enough. And slowly, as the days passed, the babies grew stronger. Elias had learned much about their species through the limited scans, through observation, and through instinct. He began to realize that their connection to one another, however tenuous, was more than just a physical bond. It was something deeper, something shared. They had been survivors, both of them, clinging to life in a dying world. And now, Elias had to become more than just a protector. He had to become their guide, their hope, their future. One morning, as he gazed out at the barren landscape from the cockpit of his ship, Elias made a silent promise to the babies. He would find out who they were. He would find out what their story was, and he would ensure that they didn't just survive but thrived. The world outside was still broken, still empty. But for the first time, Elias wasn't alone. And with that realization, a spark of purpose lit within him. There was work to be done, and he had just begun. The days drifted into a blur as Elias worked tirelessly to stabilize the two alien babies, who were still too weak to show much more than the faintest signs of life. He did everything he could to care for them, feeding them nutrient-rich formulas he created, wrapping them in soft blankets to keep them warm, monitoring their vitals, and speaking to them in hushed tones, as if the sound of his voice might comfort them. Even though they were so alien in every way, Elias couldn't shake the feeling that they were connected to him in a way he couldn't fully explain. Perhaps they had no family left, no race, no culture to call their own, but in this lonely expanse of space, they were his responsibility. They needed him. In the quiet hours between shifts, Elias sat in the cockpit, staring out at the endless landscape of the planet. The memory of the stranger's last moments weighed heavily on him. The man had brought the second baby to him, and before collapsing, had pleaded with him for help. There had been no time to ask the questions swirling in his mind. He had acted without thinking, and now he was left with only the faintest trace of the man's story, a story that would forever remain unfinished. Elias couldn't stop wondering what had happened to this mysterious stranger. What had driven him to this forsaken planet? What connection had he had to the babies he left behind? And, most importantly, how did he know Elias would be here? He didn't have the answers. But Elias knew one thing for certain: he couldn't let the man's sacrifice be in vain. The stranger had come here with a purpose, and now Elias would have to figure out what that purpose was. Elias had access to the ship's data, the logs he had saved from his various explorations. Perhaps there was something in the stranger's coordinates, or in his ship's data, that could point him toward the truth. He knew he had to investigate further, but the urgency weighed on him. Every minute spent searching was another minute the babies spent growing weaker. He turned back to them, the two small figures lying on separate cots, each a symbol of survival, each a reminder that the fate of this strange world was now intertwined with his own. Elias had lived much of his life alone, a wanderer without a home or a clear path forward. But with these children, everything had changed. They had become his mission, and that mission, no matter the cost, was to give them a future, to protect them from the ruin that had nearly claimed their lives. One evening, as he was scanning through the ship's logs for any clue that might explain the stranger's journey, Elias stumbled across something unexpected. Hidden in the encrypted files was a message, a short transmission, barely audible and distorted, but clear enough to make out. The voice was faint, but Elias could still make out the words, though they brought more confusion than clarity. The last of their kind, the children, you must protect them before it's too late. Their future, the key, the Xylothians, will stop at nothing if they find them. Elias' heart skipped a beat. Xylothians? Was this stranger talking about the same alien race that had destroyed this planet? What did they have to do with the babies? As the transmission crackled and cut off, Elias was left with more questions than answers. But one thing was certain: the danger wasn't over. It had only just begun. Someone, or something, was coming for these babies. Whoever the stranger had been, whoever had sent him to this planet, had known something Elias didn't. But he was determined to uncover it. The Xylothians, whoever they were, could not be allowed to take these children. Elias felt a renewed sense of urgency. There was no more time to waste. He had to get answers, and he had to protect the babies, no matter the cost. Chapter 4, A New Beginning. Elias didn't waste any time. He immediately set the ship on a course toward the outer rim of the galaxy, where the Xylothian Empire had once been rumored to operate. It was a long shot, but he had no other choice. The Xylothians, if they were indeed the same race the stranger had warned him about, were a powerful force. They had the resources to track these children, to erase every trace of their existence, and to destroy anything that stood in their way. Elias wasn't sure if he was capable of standing up to such an empire, but he had no choice. The babies were his responsibility now. The journey was long and fraught with dangers, but Elias was used to long stretches of isolation in space. As he traveled, he began to piece together more information, trying to make sense of the strange transmission, the mysterious stranger, and the enigmatic purpose of the babies. Every day that passed, Elias could feel the weight of his responsibility growing heavier, but he pushed forward, driven by the belief that the future of these two children depended on his actions. After several weeks of travel, Elias arrived at a remote station on the outskirts of known space. It was a quiet, desolate place, a refueling stop for passing ships, little more than a rundown outpost where few questions were asked and fewer answers were given. Here, Elias hoped to find someone who might know more about the Xylothians, someone who could help him understand the importance of the babies and the threat they faced. Inside the station, Elias was greeted by a grizzled, old mechanic who had been stationed there for longer than he cared to admit. His face was weathered, his hands rough from years of work, but his eyes held a sharp intelligence that Elias recognized immediately. He was the kind of person who had seen it all, and Elias hoped that would mean he had some answers for him. "What brings you to this forsaken place, traveler?" the mechanic asked, his voice gruff as he took a long drag from a cigarette. Elias didn't waste time. He pulled out a small data pad and showed the mechanic the encrypted message he had uncovered, the warning about the Xylothians and the importance of the alien children. The mechanic's eyes narrowed as he scanned the data, his face hardening with concern. He set the pad down and looked Elias dead in the eyes. "I knew something was wrong the moment I heard the name," he said. "Xylothians are a shadow of their former selves now, but they still have reach. If they're after these kids, you're in more trouble than you think. And if they find them..." He didn't finish the sentence. Elias didn't need him to. He could see the weight of the situation in the man's eyes. Elias stood up, determination setting in like steel. "Then I'll make sure they don't find them. These babies will not die because of what their people did. I swear it." The mechanic nodded grimly. "You're a brave man. But you'll need more than a ship and determination to take on the Xylothians. If you're serious about this, you're going to need allies. I know where to find them, but it won't be easy." Elias glanced back at the two babies, still sleeping peacefully on the cot. He had made up his mind. The fight for their future wasn't over, it had only just begun. He turned back to the mechanic, his resolve stronger than ever. "I'll do whatever it takes." The mechanic smiled faintly, though it was a smile tinged with uncertainty. "Then prepare yourself. We're about to step into a war." As Elias left the station, stepping back into his ship with the babies in his care, he knew the road ahead would be long and dangerous. The Xylothians were not an enemy to be taken lightly, and there was much Elias still didn't understand. But one thing was clear: he would fight for these children. And for whatever hope they represented, he would face the coming storm head-on. The journey had only just begun, and Elias was ready for whatever it would bring.